The Spinoff Podcast Network.
This is Kiwi is back for a brand new season with more inspiring kōrero from special guests including rugby player, father and role model TJ Perenara.
My family bring me joy. Rugby brings me joy too, but it's not the same joy as my family brings me.
And global dancer and choreographer Kirsten Dodgen.
For some reason, people think I'm very intimidating.
Listen to the new season of This is Kiwi, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in collaboration with KiwiBank. Available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
He said to his friend, "It's so silly how they put subtitles and no one can see it." And his friend was like, "No, we can see it."
Talofa lava, I'm Madeleine Chapman, editor of The Spinoff. Welcome to Behind the Story, where I go behind the scenes of a big article on the Spinoff from the week. If you want a weekly rundown of some of the best reads from the Spinoff every Saturday, make sure you sign up to the weekend newsletter. Today I'm talking to Spinoff staff writer Shanti Mathias. Actually, it was nearly 2 months ago that I talked to Shanti for a test recording of this very podcast. At the time, we spoke about a big story of hers from that week, staring down the silent epidemic of myopia in children. Shanti had done an exceptional job of putting human faces in front of and behind the glasses epidemic in Aotearoa. We talked about what she learned, the surprising lack of data available here around our eyes, and some practical tips to keeping your eyes stronger for longer. The reason we're running this podcast now is because last week, Shanti was awarded Best Emerging Journalist at the inaugural Science Journalism Awards for this very story. The judges were impressed with how on the scene the reporting was, including the voices of school students and the team running the vision checking bus. It was a hugely deserving win and the perfect excuse to release the tapes. Here's Shanti Mathias on Behind the Story. Thank you for being here, Shanti. Your story that was published on Monday on the Spinoff, headlined Staring Down the Silent Epidemic of Myopia in Children. This is short-sightedness in children, yes?
Yeah.
Not a topic that necessarily is front of mind for a lot of people at the moment. What got you into this specific topic in the first place?
I think it was actually a comment maybe that you made when I first brought it up in a staff meeting. We had a Zoom call in front of us of some of our colleagues who work remotely, and I made some comment about, there's rising people needing glasses, and you were like, well, look at that Zoom call, and every single person on the Zoom call had glasses on, and as well as several people around the table. So it was maybe just a tiny example of, we see glasses all the time, but we don't think about it too deeply. Another thing we see all the time is glasses shops. They're everywhere in malls. They're really common. And then I read this really amazing piece on Wired that was about Taiwan's policy and which has been really leading the way because they've had a huge number, just rising, skyrocketing over the last sort of 4 or 5 decades, number of kids who need glasses, and kind of went from that of okay, so it's really associated with spending more time indoors, spending more time on screens, spending more time looking at things that are close to your face and in the center of your vision, not in your peripheral vision. So all of those things, I was like, well, probably to some extent this is happening in New Zealand. And I was like, well, let's just see, find an international trend and apply it to Aotearoa, and try to first find an interesting way to make people care about that, because it is something you see so much of the time that it's very easy to not even notice that people wear glasses because it's just such an ordinary part of life.
So you're trying to answer the question, is myopia in children increasing in New Zealand? Which is a valid question, and all the reasons that you gave pretty much suggest that this should be happening in New Zealand if it's happening overseas. The headline itself, silent epidemic, that's in quote marks. Somebody said that, somebody who works in optometry. Was there anything that surprised you when you tried to just answer that question outright? Because it wasn't as easy to answer as you might think.
Yeah, there was just that there was no data about this whatsoever. The data has to be extrapolated from driver's license data, which only applies to people who have their driver's license. So you don't actually know what's going on with children. And if someone's short-sighted when they get their first license, when they're, 18, 22, you don't actually know, did they start getting short-sighted when they were 6? Did they start getting short-sighted when they were 15? And everyone I talked to was like, well, we actually don't have any national vision survey, any national vision data. We just have road testing for people for driving, which does not even apply to everyone. And also it's kind of a slightly flawed testing methodology. I don't know if you've ever had your eyes tested and they're like, oh, just have another go. Like, I'm sure you'll get through it, which has happened to me. So I just I think I found that really interesting, that it's something that we actually don't gather data much about, and kind of trying to think about the reasons why that was, which I hopefully mentioned a bit in the article.
I mean, I was going to say I have never been told to have another go at VTNZ because I have the privilege of very good eyesight. You wear glasses. I did wonder if it was partly you sort of thinking about your own eyesight, but did you have myopia as a child?
No, I didn't. Although quite a few of the people I talked to for this article, the optometrists, were all kind of got interested in optometry because they were myopic as a child. So I thought that was an interesting connection. But no, it was only when I went to university and started spending a lot of time indoors reading, looking at screens, looking at books, that I started needing to get glasses. So make of that what you will.
I mean, you said, you mentioned that being inside, basically your eyes having to strain when you're reading things close to your face, and you mentioned that kind of people talk about watching too much TV and your eyes going square, or reading in dim lighting, and how while it's not necessarily just lighting or reading, there is some truth to that.
Yeah, which I remember reading this I think it was an Anne Green Gables book, where there's some doctor gives advice to someone like, stop doing so much indoor work, you'll strain your eyes and you'll go blind faster. And I have read that, and thought, oh, that's kind of ridiculous. Like, that's the kind of health thing they were scared about in the 1800s. But there's been a big shift in scientific consensus over the last couple of decades, where they've realized that just exposure to natural light and having objects further in the distance, which is what our eyes adapted to, is kind of one of the best things you can do for your eye health, is just be outdoors more. So yeah, that was actually really surprising to me. And that it's not necessarily, it's very easy to blame screens, just screens. And they're definitely something which pulls us inside. But this has been happening for quite a long time. Of seeing kind of numbers of people needing glasses increase. So it's also just time indoors where you're not exposed to as much natural light. It's always not completely clear, but it seems like something about the UV rays and natural light activate dopamine cells, which help your eyes to be healthy. There's all sorts of like interesting scientific stuff, which I kind of point at in the article, but don't go so deeply into.
Well, now you can, because you talk, most people in the office, when they read the story, said, oh gosh, I need to go outside more, or I need to not look at my screen continuously throughout the day. What are some just real basic tips that you picked up in writing this story about how to perhaps prevent myopia in children and adults?
I was really hoping to include a couple of practical tips in the story. The general baseline is saying, especially for kids, is about 2 hours outside. So in places like China, they have outdoor classrooms. In Taiwan, they've got preschools where they just have lots of covered areas so that kids can go and play outside, or have partially outdoor classrooms. There's quite a few kind of ways just to make sure that you're outside more, or if you're kind of commuting, to try to commute on a bike or by walking instead of in a car where you're not exposed to as much light. There could be some things like that you could think about. The other thing was this sort of what someone called the 20-20 rule, which is every 20 minutes, look away from the thing which is near to you for focus your eyes on something that is at least 20 feet away, which is about 6 meters, for at least 20 seconds. So I made a comment when the story came out, being like, if I'm ever staring vaguely into the distance, which I have been ever since I started researching this, but if I'm staring vaguely into the distance, I'm just resting my eyes while I type and look at look away from my screen. It's not because I always feel like people maybe think I'm staring at them, but I'm like, no, I'm staring in the distance. I'm trying to look outside.
And was there anything, there's quite a lot, this is it's not a super short feature, you talk to a bunch of people and there's quite a lot of history, some quite concerning stats about just the percentage of young people wearing glasses in countries overseas. Was there anything that you found out that you weren't able to include in the story just because it didn't quite fit, or it was a nice little tidbit but didn't quite work within the story?
So for the story, which I haven't actually mentioned so far, is the main thing I did was just go and spend a morning on the Vision Bus in South Auckland, which is the country's only mobile optometry clinic. And it's sort of funded by philanthropy and kind of supported by the University of Auckland's optometry school. And they go to, basically they spend the whole year just going to like different schools around South Auckland. And they've done a sort of pre-screening so that they can spend more time with the kids who already have severe vision issues. Something that there was quite a lot of like interesting stuff, just sort of watching them kind of navigate lots of the difficulties of trying to make sure enough people get seen in their kind of limited time, and kids are absent, and a lot of these like logistical difficulties come into play. So I think something which I kind of mentioned it but didn't go that deep into it, is that there are a lot of other eye issues which you could also pick up while looking for myopia. So myopia is like a very common disease, but there's something like, I think it's called keratoconus, which is when the lens of your eyes becomes a bit more cone-shaped, which affects Māori and Pacifica communities a lot more. And so that's something else that they're also screening for, as well as like standard myopia. It can be associated with a lot more severe issues. And so having a form of, several people I talked to for the story were just talking about how it's a kind of strange thing. We have a mostly publicly funded system, but if it's eye health, most people will pick up eye health issues in a kind of commercially operated, kind of profit margin driven, Specsavers, Oscar Wiley, whatever. And so that means that some people won't go because they're to get their eyes checked out because they have to pay and often have to pay quite a lot. And then it also means that some of these more severe issues aren't picked up very much, and a lot of these kids and families won't be able to get urgent eye care if they had it picked up on the Vision Bus. So it's really like, I feel like myopia actually ends up being quite an interesting entry point for a whole lot of other eye health issues, which people, what I was thinking about a lot of this story is like, it's not like a heart attack, which is like, or cancer, which is a really scary and painful and very emotive. Eye health doesn't seem, you don't feel like, oh, it's a tragedy for that poor child, now they have to wear glasses for the rest of their life. And it shouldn't be like that. But it's not, because it's not a painful issue at all, it becomes easier for a lot of people to just ignore it. Or as one of the optometrists I interviewed told me, that these kids just squint through it, and they're kind of, when you squint, you can sort of slightly reduce the amount of light coming into your eyes, and that helps you to focus better. But it has, obviously, it's not that ideal because your eyes are just being put under more and more strain. And people don't realize necessarily how severe it is. And kids as well, especially, don't really have a point of comparison to realize what their eyesight might be compared to their friends. So one of the optometrists I interviewed told me that her husband had been diagnosed with myopia when he was sort of maybe 15 or 16, when he'd gone to see a movie that had subtitles, and he said to his friend, "It's so silly how they put subtitles and no one can see it." And his friend was like, "No, we can see it." It's something that you might not even know how your vision is different to anyone else's, because you can only see it through your own eyes.
Well, it sounds like the key is to talk to your friends about what they can and can't see, and if in doubt, go outside for a little bit. Thank you very much, Shanti Mathias, for coming on to talk about your story. That story, Staring Down the Silent Epidemic of Myopia in Children, can be read in full on the spinoff.co.nz. I would encourage you to read the whole thing. It is excellent. Thank you again, Shanti.
Thanks so much, Mad. Have a great weekend.
That was Behind the Story. We'll be back next week with another Spinoff writer and another great yarn. Thanks for listening.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at the Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.